The glass didn't shatter when it hit the marble floor of the penthouse kitchen. It simply cracked, a clean, quiet split down the center, the way something breaks when it has been under pressure for too long. Vivian Ashford didn't move to pick it up. She just stood there at the kitchen island at 20 minutes past 2 in the morning, her hands pressed flat against the cold stone, letting the tears fall without making a sound, because making a sound in this apartment was something she had learned, very quickly, not to do. She didn't hear him come in. She never did. The elevator doors at the end of the corridor opened without a chime, a custom modification, she'd been told, because Dominic Caruso did not announce himself. He simply arrived, and the first indication she had that she was no longer alone was the low, deliberate sound of the deadbolt on the kitchen door being turned. Not locked, engaged. Vivian's spine went rigid. Her hands flew to the hem of her sleeve, tugging the fabric down over her wrist before she could think twice about it. She turned, ready with an apology already forming on her lips. "I was just leaving. I'm sorry. I know I'm not supposed to be in here." But the apology dissolved the moment she saw his face. Dominic Caruso was not looking at the cracked glass on the floor. He was looking at her. More precisely, he was looking at the 4-inch bruise blooming along the left side of her jaw. The one she had spent the last 40 minutes convincing herself was barely visible, barely anything, barely worth mentioning to a man who ran half the financial infrastructure of the Toronto waterfront from a penthouse suite in the Distillery District, and had never once in the 6 weeks she had worked here spoken more than 12 words to her in a single day. He crossed the kitchen in silence, stopped on the other side of the island. His dark eyes moved from the bruise to the cracked glass to the damp cloth she'd been pressing against her face and back to the bruise again, and something shifted in the architecture of his expression. Not sympathy, not outrage, something colder and more deliberate than either. "Who did that to you?" he said. It was not a question. Vivian Ashford had not planned on spending her 29th birthday working as a private housekeeper for a man whose name appeared in the financial pages twice a week and the crime briefs once a month. A year ago, she had been finishing her second year of a master's program in occupational therapy at the University of Toronto, living in a 1-bedroom apartment in Kensington Market, splitting grocery runs with her younger brother, Theo. Not this Theo, not anyone connected to this world, just her brother, 23 years old, studying architecture at Ryerson, a terrible cook, the person she loved most in the world. Then their mother had a stroke. Then the private rehab facility bills arrived. Then Theo's student loan was garnished to cover a debt he hadn't known. Their mother had been quietly accumulating for 18 months with a lender who did not operate through conventional banking channels. The lender's name was Gary Holt. He ran a debt collection operation out of a strip mall in Scarborough that was, on paper, a financial services company, and was, in practice, a pressure campaign with rotating enforcers and a sliding interest rate that seemed to climb whenever a payment was slightly late. When Vivian's own savings were gone by November, a contact through her university placement coordinator, a woman who arranged domestic staffing for high-net-worth clients and asked very few questions, offered her a position that paid 3 times what anything else she had been offered. The arrangement was simple: live-in household manager for a private residence in the Distillery District. Discretion required. Availability expected. References would not be checked because the client valued privacy over credential verification. She took the job without asking who the client was. She found out the morning she arrived with 2 suitcases and a carry-on bag, and the building concierge handed her an envelope with the house rules typed on heavy cream stock and the name Caruso embossed in the upper right corner. She had heard that name before. Everyone in Toronto had heard that name. It appeared on the donor plaques of 3 hospitals and the foundation board of an Indigenous arts collective in Toronto and the ownership documents of a shipping logistics company that handled a significant volume of the cargo moving through the port of Toronto. It also appeared, periodically, in police reports that never seemed to result in charges, in association with men who moved money in ways that did not survive close scrutiny. The head of household, a tight-lipped Quebecoise woman in her 50s named Mrs. Archambault, gave Vivian the ground rules on her first morning. "You are staff. You are not a member of this household. You do not initiate conversation with Mr. Caruso. You do not look him in the eye. You do not ask questions about his schedule, his guests, or the contents of any room he uses for meetings. You clean. You manage. You disappear." For 6 weeks, Vivian had done exactly that. She had learned the rhythm of the apartment the way you learn a piece of music, not by understanding it, but by moving through it so many times that it becomes reflex. She knew that the espresso machine needed to be pre-warmed by 6:45 because Mr. Caruso was never in bed past 7, even on Sundays. She knew the south-facing boardroom needed to be fully cleared of glassware before any meeting with the men who arrived in pairs and never made eye contact with the staff. She knew the kitchen was the one room in the apartment where the security cameras had a deliberate blind spot. A detail Mrs. Archambault had mentioned once, offhandedly, in a way that suggested it was intentional, and Vivian was not meant to ask why. She had been using that blind spot tonight, for the same reason she had used it twice before in 6 weeks, to sit somewhere she would not be watched and allow herself to fall apart without consequence. The bruise was from that afternoon. Gary Holt had started sending a man named Pierce to collect in person, because the bank transfers Vivian arranged every second Friday were not, apparently, happening fast enough. Pierce was not a complicated man. He had driven to the service entrance of the distillery complex and waited for her on her afternoon break with a very simple message about the current state of Theo's outstanding balance. And when Vivian told him the next payment wasn't due until Friday, Pierce had communicated his employer's disappointment in a manner that was direct and physical, and over in about 4 seconds. She had gone back upstairs. She had pressed a cloth to her face. She had waited until her hands stopped shaking, and then she had come to the kitchen because it was the only room in the building where she felt like a person rather than a piece of furniture. She had not factored in the possibility that Dominic Caruso would come home at 2 in the morning and lock the door behind him. "It's nothing," Vivian said. Her voice was steadier than she deserved. "I fell. I'm sorry, I know I shouldn't be in here at this hour. I'll clean the glass and I'll go." Dominic Caruso did not move. He was watching her the way a man watches something he is trying to understand. Not with warmth, but with a focused, unhurried attention that was somehow more unsettling than anger would have been. "That bruise," he said, "is shaped like a closed fist." Vivian felt the floor tilt slightly under her feet. He had loosened his tie at some point. It hung open against the collar of his shirt, and there was a faint smell on him of rain and the cold bite of late October off the lake. His hands were in his pockets. His voice when he spoke carried no particular volume and no particular emotion, and an absolute absence of any interest in being contradicted. "I've been around violence my entire life," Dominic said. "I know what it leaves behind. So I'm going to ask you again, Vivian, once more, and I'd like a straight answer." He paused. "Who did that to you?" The use of her name stopped her cold. In 6 weeks he had never used her name. She had been the housekeeper, or, occasionally, nothing at all, a presence to be acknowledged by proximity rather than identification. The fact that he knew her name, that he had apparently known it the whole time, and simply held it in reserve, cracked something open in her chest that she had not been prepared for. The dam she had been holding since her mother's first hospital admission, since Theo's face when he showed her the garnishment notice, since Pierce's hand connected with her jaw in a service corridor in the distillery district. All of it buckled at once. "His name is Pierce," she said. The words came out flat and factual, the way words do when you are too tired to arrange them into something more palatable. "He works for a man named Gary Holt. My brother owes Holt money, a debt our mother ran up before she got sick. I've been paying it down, but the interest keeps climbing, and today I was short, and Pierce came to tell me that in the way that Pierce tells people things." Dominic did not react, not visibly. "Pierce came here," he said, "to this building, to the service entrance. Yes." A silence. "This building," Dominic said again, very quietly, "has a biometric entry system on every exterior access point. The service entrance is monitored by my security team." He was no longer looking at her bruise. He was looking slightly past her at the middle distance, and something in his stillness had changed. It was no longer the stillness of a man containing his reaction. It was the stillness of a man who had already made a decision and was simply waiting to execute it. "A man got through that entrance to put his hands on a member of my household staff. Yes, I'm sorry. I didn't tell him where I worked, I promise. He must have followed me one morning or found it through the agency. Stop apologizing," Dominic said. She stopped. He pulled out a phone from his inside jacket pocket, dark glass, no case. He dialed a number from memory. When the line connected, he said 4 words, "Lock it down, full sweep." Then he ended the call and looked at her again. "You're going to stay in this kitchen," he said, "while I find out how Gary Holt's man walked into my building." What followed had the quality of something from a film. The kind of film you watch from behind a blanket because the tension is enjoyable only at a safe remove. Vivian stood at the kitchen island and listened to the building change around her. There were no alarms, no raised voices. But the low hum of the climate control system deepened, and the indicator lights on the building's smart panels shifted from green to a cold amber. From somewhere below, she heard the sound of the underground garage gates engaging. Within minutes, a man she recognized from the lobby, tall, with a careful way of moving that suggested ongoing threat assessment, appeared at the kitchen doorway, and exchanged a look with Dominic that required no words. The service entrance has a mechanical override, the man said. His name, she would later learn, was Adler. Someone with building access had to trigger it from the inside. Dominic nodded once. Get me the access logs for the last 72 hours. Pull them from the secondary system, not the main panel. And Adler, nobody leaves until I say so. When Adler left, Dominic came back to the island. He opened a drawer beneath the cooktop that Vivienne had always assumed contained spare utensils and removed instead a small flat medical kit, the kind used on film sets or in facilities where injuries were expected to be handled privately. He put it on the marble and unlatched it. Sit, he said. Vivienne sat on one of the counter stools, and he came around the island and opened the kit without asking whether she was comfortable with this. He removed a cold compress, cracked it against his knee to activate it, and held it out for her to take. Then he removed an antiseptic wipe and a small tube of arnica gel and set to work on the cut at the edge of her jaw with the same manner of a man who has done this before. Not gently, exactly, but without any of the awkward overdelicacy of someone unaccustomed to wounds. Gary Holt, Dominic said as he worked. He operates the debt collection company in Scarborough, yes, and the original debt. Your brother's name is on it. Theo. He didn't take the loan. Our mother used his credit information without him knowing, while he was in his first year at Ryerson. She had a problem, gambling mostly, online, toward the end. She's in a facility now, a good one, in Mississauga, but Holt's been collecting on a balance that's tripled from the original amount because of the interest structure he uses, which is predatory, Dominic said. Illegal, Vivienne corrected quietly. He glanced up at her. For a moment, the clinical distance in his expression shifted into something she couldn't quite name. You know it's illegal, he said. I have a master's in progress. I'm not incompetent. She stopped. I didn't know who else to go to, and Theo is 23. He can't afford a lawyer. And the people you'd normally report this to in Scarborough are people Gary Holt has had coffee with. Dominic's jaw tightened. He pressed the cold compress back against her face, lightly, and held it there for a moment with his thumb. How much, he said. 63,000, as of this week. He didn't react to the number. He simply capped the arnica, placed the spent wipe back in the kit, and closed the latch. By the laws of how this building works, Dominic said, standing to his full height again. A man who puts his hands on someone in my household and walks away, that doesn't happen. Not in my building, not with my staff. He looked at her steadily, and someone opened that service door for him. Someone with access. Vivienne felt the cold land on her. There's a second problem, she said. Yes, Dominic agreed. There is. He didn't take her with him when he left the kitchen. He simply said, stay here, in the tone of a man who expected the instruction to be followed, and disappeared into the east corridor of the penthouse. Vivienne stayed. 30 minutes later, there was a dull, contained sound from somewhere down the hall, a sound she couldn't identify, but that settled in her chest with a weight she understood without wanting to. Then silence, then Dominic's footsteps, returning. He came back into the kitchen and moved directly to the bar cart beside the refrigerator, poured 2 fingers of something amber into a glass, and drank it without sitting down, his back half turned to her. His shirt, she noticed, was slightly different than it had been. The cuffs had been rolled up. The override on the service door, he said, was triggered using a keycard registered to one of the building staff. A man named Riordan, who has been on building maintenance for 4 years. He set the glass down. Riordan has been supplementing his income by providing access information to third parties. He did not understand the nature of what he was doing. A pause. He does now, Vivienne decided not to ask what that meant. The debt, Dominic said, turning to face her, is no longer your concern. She stared at him. What does that mean? It means Gary Holt will not be collecting from your brother. The balance is gone. Your brother will receive a letter within the week confirming the account is closed. The air went out of her lungs. You can't just... I can, he said, not arrogantly, simply as a statement of operational fact. Holt operates in sectors of Scarborough that intersect with interests I oversee. He has been given a strong incentive to revise his business practices, beginning with the elimination of the Evans family file. My last name is Ashford. The debt is in Theo Ashford's name. Yes, I know. The quiet that followed was the kind that asks a question without forming one. You knew my brother's name, Vivienne said. Before tonight. Dominic looked at her with an expression that was not quite an apology and not quite an admission. I conduct due diligence on everyone who enters this household, and you knew Holt was collecting from me. I knew you were managing a financial obligation. I did not know the nature of it until tonight. A beat. I did not know he was sending someone to my building. There was something in the way he said that, a shift in the weight of the words, a particular emphasis on my building, that made Vivienne understand what was actually driving this, and it wasn't entirely her. "This isn't just about me," she said. "No," Dominic said honestly. "The building breach concerns me for reasons that extend well beyond your welfare." But he paused. It seemed like an unusual thing for him, pausing. "Your welfare also concerns me increasingly." The kitchen was very quiet. Somewhere below, Toronto hummed along indifferently. "Who's Riordan?" Vivian asked, because she needed to say something. "Taken care of," Dominic said. "Don't think about Riordan. That's not an answer. It's the answer I'm giving you." He crossed to the kitchen doorway and stopped there, hand resting against the frame. "There's a room prepared in the east wing. Mrs. Archambault will bring you breakfast in the morning. You're not sleeping in the staff quarters tonight." Vivienne opened her mouth. "You're a witness to a security breach in my household," he said before she could object. "You don't leave my sight. Practically speaking, it was not romantic, it was operational. And yet, somehow, it was the most protected she had felt in 14 months. She didn't sleep. She lay in the east wing room. Silk the color of river stones, blackout curtains, a bed that cost more than her first car, and stared at the ceiling and listened to the building reconfigure itself around her. Voices, muted by walls and distance, the sound of vehicles in the underground garage arriving and departing. Adler's voice at one point outside her door, relaying something in a tone too low to pass. By 6 in the morning, she gave up on sleep and dressed and found her way to the main kitchen on instinct. Dominic was already there. He was standing at the window wall that overlooked the courtyard of the distillery, a coffee in hand, still dressed from last night, though the tie was gone now, and he'd traded the jacket for a dark merino sweater that made him look for a disorienting moment, like a person rather than an institution. The early light off the bricks was thin and grey and honest in the way that October light in Toronto always is, interned when she came in. "Sit," he said. "I'll put the espresso on. I can do it. Sit." She sat. He made the coffee with the ease of someone who had been doing it this way for a long time, and placed a cup in front of her on the island, and then stayed on the opposite side, leaning with his forearms on the marble, and looked at her in the flat morning light, without the clinical distance of last night. "Your brother," he said. "Where is he right now? His apartment in Liberty Village. He needs to move." Today, Vivienne set the cup down. Why? Because Gary Holt is not a man who accepts instruction gracefully. He will comply. The economics of non-compliance are not in his favor, but in the interim, he may direct his frustration at the most accessible target, which is Theo. Dominic looked at her steadily. "I've arranged for him to be relocated to a suite at a property I own in Yorkville. My team will handle it. He'll be told it's a short-term arrangement related to a building management issue. He doesn't need to know the rest." The rest. Vivienne turned the coffee cup in her hands. "You moved him before I even woke up. I made the call at 4:30. He's already there." She thought about Theo, about the face he'd made when she showed him the garnishment notice, the way he'd gone very still, the way 23-year-olds go still when the world first truly frightens them. She thought about him waking up this morning in an apartment in Yorkville, probably confused, probably texting her, and she felt something shift in her chest so violently she had to press her hand flat against the island to stay anchored. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "I was aware. I mean it. You didn't have to do any of this." Dominic looked at her for a moment. Then he said, "You've been cleaning the blood off imported rugs and crying in my kitchen at 2 in the morning for 6 weeks, Vivienne, trying to protect someone. That is, not something I was going to ignore indefinitely." The frankness of it undid her more than any formal declaration could have. She looked at the surface of her coffee to get her bearings. "You knew I was crying in here." "I suspected. The camera blind spot exists for a reason. I didn't want to know everything that happened in my own house." He said this without self-congratulation, just as a fact. "I regret that it went on as long as it did." The day passed the way days pass when a war is happening quietly in the background, in increments, with a lot of waiting broken by short bursts of information. Adler appeared twice with updates in a language Vivienne was only beginning to learn. The Holt situation is being managed. The Scarborough contact has confirmed. Riordan has been removed from the building roster. Each update landed with the flat efficiency of a man who spent his life problem-solving and had no attachment to the drama of the problems. Dominic worked through the day from the boardroom at the north end of the Penthouse. Occasionally, he moved to the solarium that faced the lake, spreading paper across the teak table in a way that reminded Vivienne, absurdly, of a man doing a renovation plan. Precise, cross-referenced, building something. At one point, she brought him coffee without being asked, because old habits, and he looked up from the table and said, "You don't have to do that." "I know," she said, and stayed. He watched her for a moment. Then he said, "Sit down if you want to. You don't have to stand." She sat in the chair across the table from him, through the glass of the solarium, The lake was the color of pewter under a low sky. A container ship was moving slowly toward the harbor, lit along its waterline. "Your mother," he said, without looking up from the pages. "The facility in Mississauga. Is it adequate?" "She's doing well, actually." The stroke took her left side mobility and some of her language processing. "She's in speech therapy 3 times a week and physio daily. Vivian stopped. "She knows what she did to Theo. The debt. She knows. I think she'll spend the rest of her life trying to account for it." "And you," Dominic said, "have you accounted for it?" "For yourself." The question landed with precision in a space she usually kept walled off. "I dropped out of school to manage this," she said. "I'm a housekeeper at 29 in someone's penthouse. I haven't really been accounting for much of anything." Dominic set his pen down. "You didn't drop out, you deferred. Same thing, practically. It isn't." He looked at her directly. "When the situation with Holt is resolved, the position of household manager remains yours if you want it. The compensation would be adjusted. And there is graduate program in occupational therapy at U of T that offers an accelerated re-entry track for students who've deferred for extenuating circumstances. My foundation funds 2 bursaries annually for that program." A pause. "I'm aware that sounds like a condition." "It isn't, it's a point of information." Vivian looked at him. "You looked up my degree program." "I looked up your file," he said without apology. "I told you. Due diligence." She couldn't tell for a moment whether to be unnerved by this or not. She decided, surprising herself, to land on something closer to relief. "You're a strange person," she said. Something moved in his expression. It might have been the beginning of a smile. "Yes," he agreed. It was close to midnight when it happened, the thing that unraveled the last assumption Vivienne had been holding on to. She was in the kitchen again, because the kitchen had apparently become her location of choice for falling apart, and, now, for remaining in one piece. She was making tea, standing at the range with the kettle on when she heard Adler's voice in the hallway. She wasn't trying to listen. The apartment was quiet enough that she simply could. Adler was on the phone. His voice was low, factual, and wrong. The information he was relaying was wrong. He was describing, in careful neutral language, the layout of the building's east wing access corridors, the timing of the security sweep rotation, and the exact floor on which Vivienne was housed. He was not speaking to someone inside the building. She stood very still, the way you stand when the thing you're hearing hasn't yet been processed, but your body already knows to stop moving. Then she set the kettle carefully and quietly back on the range, slid her feet out of her shoes so she made no sound on the hardwood, and moved down the east corridor toward Dominic's study. She knocked once and opened the door without waiting. He was at his desk, reading glasses on, a detail that startled her, somehow, the sheer ordinariness of it, and he looked up with a sharpness that told her he registered immediately that something was wrong. "Adler," she said. "He's on the phone. He's describing my location in the building and the rotation schedule, and I think he's speaking to someone from Holt's operation, or someone connected to them." Dominic took his glasses off. The stillness that overtook him was absolute. "Say that again," he said. She said it again. He stood. There was a quality to the way he moved now that had no equivalent in anything she had seen him do before. Not last night's controlled assessment. Not this morning's careful frankness. This was something anterior to all of that. Something prior to civilization, almost. "Go back to the East Wing room," he said. "Lock the door. Do not open it until I come for you personally." Dominic, Vivienne. He looked at her. "Trust me, go." She went. She sat on the floor of the East Wing room with her back against the bed frame and counted her breaths. She heard nothing through the walls. This building, like everything Dominic Caruso owned, was insulated against disclosure. At one point, distant, she thought she heard the elevator engage. Then nothing. 40 minutes passed. 3 quiet knocks. "It's me," Dominic said. Through the door, she opened it. He had his sleeves rolled to the elbow. He was standing in the doorway with the same expression he'd had in the kitchen last night. Controlled, evaluated, decided, but underneath it now was something that looked, quietly, like exhaustion. "Adler has been managed," he said. She chose not to ask what that meant either. He's been feeding information to an intermediary connected to Holt's network for approximately 3 weeks. Long enough to have provided details about the building's security sweep and staff housing. He paused. He was attempting to arrange a situation in which pressure could be applied to you directly, inside the building, as a way of compelling faster payment from your brother. The cold of that moved through her slowly. "He was going to let someone in," she said. "Here. To the apartment? Yes. To get to me? Yes." Dominic looked at her steadily. "That is not going to happen. It will not happen. Holt's operation, as it currently exists, will not survive this week." Vivienne leaned against the doorframe because her legs suggested it. "You're going to war over a debt collector from Scarborough." "I'm going to war," Dominic said, Because two people in my inner circle, in 2 nights, thought they could sell access to what is mine, that is the war. You are the reason I discovered it." He paused. For the second time, she looked up. There was something in his face now that she had not seen before. Not the cold precision, not the operational calm, not even the startling moments of candor. This was unguarded. Just a man, close to midnight in a hallway, looking at the person who had, in the space of 24 hours, handed him 2 betrayals wrapped in the specific shape of her own survival. He stepped forward and put his hand against her jaw, the unbruised side, with a care that had nothing clinical in it. "You're not a housekeeper," he said. Not anymore. She felt something in her chest release that had been wound tight for so long she had forgotten it was there. "What am I, then?" she said. He looked at her for a long moment, and then said something she did not expect from a man like him. "Safe, if you'll let yourself be." The fall of Gary Holt's operation took 11 days. Vivienne spent most of those 11 days inside the building, which she was half waiting to resent and half grateful for in ways she didn't entirely want to examine. The world outside the penthouse was dense and cold in the way that November in Toronto is always cold. The kind of cold that comes off the lake and settles in the bones. Inside, the building ran with the focused quiet of a facility preparing for something. Men moving through corridors with purpose, the boardroom occupied for long, uninterrupted stretches. On the 3rd day, Theo called. He had been briefed, vaguely, carefully, on the situation, and was managing his alarm with the particular stubbornness of someone who wanted to be the one handling things and couldn't quite argue with the current arrangement. He was fine, he said. The Yorkville suite had good light and he'd been able to work on his studio project. He asked about her 3 times in the space of a 10-minute call, which meant he was worried. "I'm fine," she told him. "I'm actually fine." She wasn't sure, when she said it, whether it was still a performance or whether it had become the truth. On the 8th day, she found Dominic in the solarium at 7 in the morning, standing over the teak table with a map of the Scarborough waterfront. He looked up when she came in. She set a coffee beside the map and pulled out the opposite chair. He raised an eyebrow. "You said I didn't have to stand," she said. He sat down. They worked in the same room for 2 hours. He at the table, she with a textbook she had retrieved from her deferred program's online library. A first tentative gesture toward something she'd stopped letting herself want. Occasionally, he asked her something. Occasionally, she answered. The language between them was building itself in the unhurried way of something that does not need to announce itself. On the 11th day, Adler came to the solarium door and said, simply, "It's done." Dominic nodded. He looked at Vivienne. "Holt has closed his operation voluntarily," he said, with the specific inflection of voluntarily that meant something other than its dictionary definition. "The outstanding accounts have been voided. Theo's file has been destroyed. The original lender, the person your mother initially borrowed from, before Holt acquired the debt, has also been addressed." She stared at him. There was an original lender. "Yes, you went all the way back." "I went all the way back," he confirmed. Vivienne put the textbook down on the table. For a moment she couldn't speak, and she didn't try to. She sat with it, the weight of 14 months, the particular heaviness of a debt that had shaped every decision she'd made since her mother's diagnosis, the way she had organized her entire life around a problem that no longer existed. "My mother doesn't know any of this is happening," she finally said. "She doesn't need to. Theo will figure out eventually. He can figure it out. He's smart, and when he does, he can have whatever feelings about it he needs to have." Dominic leaned back in his chair. "That's not your job to manage." She looked at him across the table. In the morning light off the lake, he looked for a moment like someone who had carried his own weight for a very long time and had perhaps not entirely accounted for himself either. "Thank you," she said. He held her gaze. "Don't, Dominic. I didn't do it to be thanked. I know," she said. "That's why I'm thanking you." Something in his expression shifted. A small movement, almost nothing, the kind you would miss if you were not paying attention. She was paying attention. She stood up. She walked around the end of the table. She stopped beside his chair, and he looked up at her, and she said very quietly, "I'm not your housekeeper anymore." "You said so." "Yes," he agreed. "So this," she put her hand against his jaw, mirroring exactly what he had done to her 11 days ago in the East Wing doorway, "is not a staff matter." A pause, during which the lake went on being the lake and Toronto went on being Toronto, and neither of them moved. "No," Dominic Caruso said very quietly. "It is not." She leaned down and pressed her lips to his temple. "The way you do when the gesture is too large to be translated into anything more legible," and he brought his hand up to rest against her wrist. Steadying, holding, not directing, and that was enough. That was the whole world, for a moment. Outside, the first snow of the season was beginning to fall over the distillery district, soft and early and indifferent to the lives it was falling on. Inside, the woman who had arrived with 2 suitcases and a problem she could not solve had set both of them down, at last, and let herself stay.